I'm looking around these rehearsals and they're like doing all this stuff with their mouths and their hands and they're playing all these games and they know all these tongue twisters and I was just like, oh, what do I do? And I was just, every day, like I knew it was coming up my turn for this, I had to pick the warm-up exercise and I must have been like shriveling as a person and I had one bro in the cast, thank goodness, and he must have picked up on it and he just said, sis, just play Duck, Duck, Goose. And I was like, okay. And so I was like, got to my turn, I was like, we're going to be playing Duck, Duck, Goose for a warm-up exercise. I'm an actor. I know how to do this.
My name is Paikea and I come from a long line of chiefs stretching all the way back to Hawaii. One of the most emotional scenes in a great New Zealand film, The Whale Rider. And of course, the star of that movie is Keisha Castle-Hughes, now living in New York, but wanting to come back home to Aotearoa to develop Māori content for the world. Our guest for Indigenous 100 on this episode is the one and only Keisha Castle-Hughes on Indigenous 100. Keisha Castle-Hughes, tēnā koe.
Tēnā koe.
Welcome to Indigenous 100. It's awesome to have you on the program.
Thank you. I'm really excited to be here.
Are you really?
Yeah, I am.
Don't be.
Okay, now I'm a little
It'll end up as
terrified.
bathos.
Yeah, exactly.
It'll end up as bathos. No, it is awesome to have you.
Yeah.
Because, and I'll tell you why, I've watched FBI.
Mm-hmm.
And when I see you there and in Game of Thrones, I just think, wow, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Because I don't know if you know this, but people look at you and they see you as, they see you as our girl.
Yeah.
And so when we see you doing that stuff, as impressive as it is, we go, too much, girl.
Oh, that's awesome.
And do people talk about that or not?
To some degree, people do. And I think, it's something that I remain conscious of, and it's like a responsibility that I have never taken lightly. I also don't, wear it on my back as if, it's something I need to carry either.
Yeah.
But, I just think a lot about, when I was growing up in terms of representation and what that looked like, and there just wasn't a lot of it. And there wasn't a lot of seeing people that looked like me, on screen or really, in any spaces other than what I knew, and so it's kind of, sometimes it can be a little, you just get into the grind of stuff sometimes and you just do the mahi and it's like everyone, sometimes it feels like, oh, you're just at work. And then it's really nice sometimes when I come home and go, oh, that's right, there's heaps of other Māori, other brown people all over the world, Indigenous people that, see people like me or others in those spaces and go, oh, that's, I think something shifts in your consciousness, it's like, hey, if that person's doing it, I could. Yeah. Which is, awesome.
So you are aware of that, and do you see it as a responsibility of yours? I mean, is that fair for you to feel that way?
I don't know if it's it's something a responsibility as something to wear and hold, but it's something that I feel privileged to be able to do, and it's something that I am aware of, and I think, and trying to keep that integrity in all spaces of my own life and whatever trajectory my career goes, and in the last decade or so, it's been predominantly based in the States, and there was a big expansion and shift for me, when I started working over there in terms of the roles I was offered and allowed to do, which was interesting as well. And so, I remember when I was a lot younger and I was in Aotearoa, I was always a little confused by the idea that I could only really go for Māori roles. And it never sat right with me. I would read these scripts and go oh, this character's really great and my understanding of where my career was going was that I was pretty okay at what I did, and and so I was like, well, great, that means I can have the opportunity to read for the lead in this thing, and it would be like, that character's not Māori, and it was like, what?
Oh, so that would happen in
and
auditions and read-throughs,
really?
Wow.
It would happen a lot, and so.
But as good as you were, as good as you are,
exactly, like it would, and so it was this, and it was really kind of confusing, and the ceiling felt pretty low in terms of, it was like, okay, the opportunity didn't feel like it was going to go much further, and opportunity arose to leave and to go away. And I remember it was funny because then I got to the States, and then you kind of like shift on the totem pole in a way. It was like the first time where it was like, it felt like the colour of my skin had changed. I got to America and people were like, well, you're white. And all of a sudden I was like, almost doing haka on the street. Like, I was like, I'm Māori, what are you talking about? It's like, oh, that's strange, because they just, it's like they just see someone who's, white presenting, you from, a country where you speak English, and to them there's not, like, there wasn't back then, not even that long ago, it's changed a lot even in the last 15 years, but a greater understanding of Māori. And so, I've digressed, but so I think, but it's changed my viewpoint on what representation is as well. I think in terms of that responsibility, I really believe that representation comes in all forms, and it doesn't necessarily have to be me playing Māori characters, but I think in terms of my integrity and my kaupapa, me being in any space is a big win. Yeah. For me and for us.
Yeah, it's funny because when we seen you in those roles, and as I say, I just mentioned 2 Game of Thrones and FBI. It's funny because the first thing I see is Māori.
Yeah, exactly.
No matter what the role is, yes, she is.
Yeah.
Awesome, that's us. Even though the role is completely different.
Exactly.
Not even anywhere near aligned to anything Māori, but that's what we see, and we see that as a win.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think, and also too, it's really fascinating. I have been really fortunate to have within our industry, and industry like at large, like have friends who are other First Nations or Indigenous around the world. And, it's interesting because it's like within all of our own communities, it's the same. We know what that means to us, and maybe the big guys on the big shows that you're working in, they don't care. I recently, on the show FBI that I'm doing, we had written in a Māori storyline, and my character, and there's not a lot of space often for like personal storylines in those procedural cop shows, but it was something that I had been promised early on and something that had attracted me to the role, and there had been some shifts in the writers and changes as that happens, and it kind of got lost, in that was their thing, and I fought really hard. Because I was like, I know this feels like it's just not a big deal to you guys, and it's just this like one episode in this big monster machine where this character, finds out that she is Māori. But I was like, in my community, in my world, what that means to have that, to have te reo spoken on network television in America, to be able to bring that to the forefront is huge. It's such a massive win. And it, and it was, and really emotional for us, I think, too. Like, and it can be for me as well. And I guess, like my whānau, I felt, we felt really disconnected from being Māori growing up, and we're kind of like 3rd generation, like, urban refugee, and that had all, but so there's my own understanding of what being Māori is still a big journey. But I was just like, this is really important. And so when I was able to get that across the line and do that, and it was, and I was being met with a lot of people who were like, just give her the bloody Maori line, they're like that kind of energy. But it was just like, man, this is a really, really big deal for us. Yeah.
Yeah. Is that something that you consciously fought for right from the beginning? Did you write that into the contract?
Yeah, right from the beginning. And it was, it was a big, our initial showrunner, he he had talked to me about it when they were first bringing me into the show, and even down to, he'd said to me, eventually I want to explore the idea that this character, she's adopted and she finds out that she's Māori. And, and if that's the case, what would be, an appropriate name for her. And so, even right up in the beginning, her name's Hana. And, and that was like a perfect, middle ground. It's like, Paikea can still say Hannah and, and it still feels like theirs, but we know it's, and it's just even just those little gems sometimes, like as an actor, like those things are so precious to carry. And like now this is a character I've played for nearly 5 years. To have that, to know that like, that name is, the original concept and idea of that was that she has a Māori name. It's really nice to be able to hold on to that.
When you first went to America, was it simply because you felt too limited, too constricted by Aotearoa? And was that because you'd gone as far as you could have, given the impact of Wairarapa and Paikea?
I think so. I think it was a combination of lots of things. Definitely it was, I didn't feel like there was enough work to sustain, a version of a career here. And I felt really limited in terms of like what else I could do. I did Wairarapa when I was so young. It was so incredibly, it drastically changed the course and rewrote the course of my life, but also my family's life. I grew up in Glen Innes with a single mum and, 5 siblings. These kinds of opportunities were not on the table. They weren't even in my sight. They weren't something that we saw or heard about. And so there was a lot of, the hard thing is that there was, I think, a lot of expectation that I would like continue on with this career. But, there's the practicality of like, when you come from spaces where you don't have a fallback and your fallbacks are kind of statistical things, and I'd also had a pepe when I was 16 and I'd, kind of was living a lot of like parallel, like this was, that was the life that felt very carved out for me. And those were the options that felt available to me when I was growing up. It was very, I didn't have access to education that with educators that encouraged anything beyond, you kind of went to a trade school or you just like had kids and went on the benefit really. Like those, those were the options and that's what I saw around me. And so I just felt like if I wanted to keep doing this, it was really hard also to stay in Aotearoa and like maintain, I think, some idea of this career when like those opportunities were not presenting themselves, and I wasn't actually making enough money to support myself and my family. And so it was like, okay, well, if I've got to give this a go, like I really have to get out and go, and really go for it.
Did you get many offers after Wairarapa? I mean, there's all these rumours that you hear. One I heard was that Spielberg was really keen to get you on something. You hear all these. I don't know if they're true or not, but that's stuff that people talk about.
I definitely did, and that was the other thing. It was just like because of my family's circumstances. It was also like, how do you manage that? Yeah. Do you know, like how did my mum? It was like how was she to manage like raising other children? The best she could and with the tools she had, and then also like somehow get this kid to auditions or like, and a lot of that stuff is about accessibility, and I think, and the film industry especially is still very much, an industry that is, can be a little limited by your access. And, and those things in order to, the commitment that's required to get to auditions and to commit your time and to take time off school and, those things require a safety net that, we just didn't have. And so I think we just navigated it the best we could and kind of did and figured it out as we went. And it just kind of kept working. And so it was like every time it was like, okay, well that worked and that's a win and okay, and then that would lead to the next job and the next job. And I also too, I had a lot of confusion around, it's like it was a huge, now I can look at it a little bit with a bit of perspective as an adult, but a really huge life experience for a child. And there was a lot of pressure from adults, going like, this is massive. Like, this is a really big deal, and you've got to, like, take this opportunity, and you've got to run with it, and you can't miss this. And I was just like an 11-year-old girl going, I just want to go to school. I just want to, like, have normal experiences. I didn't, want to seem ungrateful there, and so it was like, I think, I had a lot of memories for a long time that existed in the space of what other people had told me about it versus my own experience, because I felt like I had to be excited by these things. I had to be grateful to have them. But I just didn't have any understanding of what really was the massive, like, the magnitude of what the success of the film and the success that I had achieved. I didn't understand any of that. And so there was definitely, like, a period where I really wanted to do anything but act, and I wanted the opportunity to figure out whether that was actually what I wanted to do or not. It's a really unique position, and there weren't very many other people to go to ask for advice either, and so it was just like, I wasn't a theatre kid, I wasn't going to drama classes, I wasn't, I was just like, rugged little girl going to and from school every day, and
and also having to put up with a lot of pressure.
A lot, yeah.
From my associates in the media.
Yeah.
And I can't imagine, I mean, that must be unbearable when you're at that age. So even if, say, at 13, right, and you're under a microscope, actually, you're under a telephoto microscope, where people are trying to get at you every day of the week, every hour of the day. I can't imagine what that must have been like.
Yeah, it was really, and because I think too I was so young, it became so very quickly like just a regular part of my life that it, and that I didn't really understand the feeling that I was given, and it wasn't by any one specific, but just the general collective, was that this was what came with the territory.
Wow.
That it was just like, if you achieve this kind of success, or, this is just what happens, and you just got to suck it up and deal with it, and even though intuitively I would feel like this is wrong, like, why can't I just go to school without having my picture taken? Why can't I go, like, get drunk with my mates at 14 without it ending up as a story in the paper? Why, and have these really normal, regular experiences that everyone was doing and everyone does and everyone will forever do, without it being, torn apart. And, and of course it was like I was understandably severely anxious teenager, and, and very, had suffered from a lot of depression and anxiety because I was constantly questioning, like, what people's motives were, or who I could trust, or, I would think I would have friends and I would tell them things, and then next thing it would end up in the paper, and, it was just a really bizarre time. But the idea that I was given was, it was just like, this is just how it is. But it's interesting because I look back on that time, I'm like, I just, like, New Zealand doesn't really do that. Like, we don't, it was such a bizarre, we don't really have, like, paparazzi. We don't really have, I mean, we can be a little tabloidy and gossipy, but we don't, it's not actually with the territory. And now as an adult, I have, like, many friends who manage to live, like, and now I do, luckily, like, really quiet lives, and their private lives stay private, and they're celebrated for what they do in their professional lives. And so I think it was like this bizarre just combination at a time where it was, I don't know, it was like all the wrong things all met in the, it was like this ticking time bomb in a way.
It felt to me like here's this really sensational, amazing young Māori woman, and we're going to go her.
Yeah.
That's what it felt like.
And I think too, like, I very strongly feel, and this isn't a poor me in any way, that there was a lot of racial undertones that happened. Do you know, like, and I think there was, my story wasn't, it wasn't a linear, nice story to tell. Do you know, like, it wasn't a story about a young girl who had, like, stable family home and went to drama classes and like achieved success. There was a lot of skeletons in my closet. In my whānau's closet, there was a lot of messiness, and those things. I don't think people. It was just too easy to like go, well, what? Like this person in her family is an alcoholic, and like now she's drinking, and this, and where's her dad? Oh, he's nowhere. All those kinds of things, and and looking, it's funny. I recently had done an interview where the interviewer had like kind of reminded me of just in a very respectful way some of the articles and some of the things, and I was just like, man, it was just crazy, like writing.
Said, bro, what are you on?
Like writing stories about like there was like writing stories about like how much KFC I was buying. Like how is that not like a racial undertone? Like it was just like. It's just like, oh, this, big brown family at the Papakura KFC, like buying too much. It's just like, really, guys? Like, that's the kind of stuff that we're writing about. And I think too, when you grow up in those spaces, you already, I already grew up with a real, like, chip on my shoulder. I grew up in, spaces where people didn't really expect me to, like, do much with my life anyway. And you see it, and it's like, it's institutionalized, it's systemic, and it's like when people come at you with that kind of energy, the first thing I think, inherently I would do was like, oh, well, yep, I am, so here it is, and I would kind of lean into it and be like even naughtier. and even more like, yeah, take it or leave it, man, like this is what we're all like, like we're all just a bunch of this and, whatever you think. And so... yeah, and so it was just, I think, also in terms of leaving, it became necessary as well, and it became necessary for my family.
Yeah, but that stupid, stereotypical kind of approach is just ridiculous. Mm-hmm. And I know it was necessary to leave, but all of it's unnecessary.
Oh, absolutely.
And, one of the other things, and I do want to ask you about this, is there was also a view from Māori about, well, who's she? She's not Māori enough. Born in Australia.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
GI, all that.
And it was, absolutely. And that was the thing. And I think a lot of us growing up have, it shouldn't be a privilege to feel Māori enough. And I do feel like, thankfully, that conversation is shifting. Yeah. But I grew up very much... desperately like wanting to be Paikea. Like it was this, I didn't, even though I grew up around, everyone I grew up around was brown, we were all in some way removed from who we are. And it wasn't, and the closest you got to it was, counting to 10 in Māori and doing like kapahaka, and learning a couple of songs and especially growing up, I think, in low socio, like, neighbourhoods in Tamaki Makaurau, and so I felt that very much, like this, even the experience of going and making Whale Rider, my whānau whakapapa to Tokomaru Bay just up the road, but that wasn't something that I'd ever had access to, even though I knew those things, and I felt very much like I wasn't allowed there, it felt very much like, well, go on then, he me ana, and it's like, I can't, I don't know how, and it was just, I've never been allowed to, I don't know what to say, and so there was this real kind of, well, are you Māori? I was like, I don't know, I don't know, and so I definitely felt a lot of that pressure as well, and I think a lot of us have felt that, we're not Pākehā enough and we're not Māori enough, and that is the displacement, and that and that does really intense stuff to someone's wairua, and it took me a really long time, and weirdly, like I said, it was when I first started really defending, like I'd grown up as a little girl, I used to hold on to this idea that I was born in Australia because it was my way of being. It was my excuse. It was, it's not my fault that I don't know how to kōrero Māori. I was born in Aussie, my dad's Pākehā. And I had, I think there was a lot of self-hatred and, not understanding of oneself. And then I went to America and people were like, well, you're white. And I'd be like, oh. And I heard myself saying out loud, I'm Māori for the first time in my life, and defending it and feeling, and feeling my blood itching and feeling myself, when people would mistake me for being Paikea, fully, or they would dismiss the fact that I was in any way brown, or I would be in rooms where other white people might say things that they wouldn't say if they knew there was a brown person in the room. I would feel that thing when my blood would start to boil. And I would go, oh, okay. And so, but, it took me leaving and being away to really start discovering that part of myself.
Yeah, I understand that point.
Yeah.
I remember going to America, I think it was when I was 16, and you not only do you miss home, but you feel like, I've got to be more. I've got to be really staunch about my Māori-ness.
Yes.
Because Americans don't really care about anyone else in the world.
No.
And they don't know much about New Zealand. They may have heard about the All Blacks, or at that stage.
They love the haka at the start of the All Blacks. Yeah, exactly. That's
about
it. Yeah.
I think at that time they knew about the America's Cup, and that was about it. And then they thought we were Australian. And at the time, actually, when I was there, it was kind of, this is way before you were born, so it's almost like prehistory here. But it was at the time the Iraq War had started. So anyone who looked brown, they immediately thought was Middle Eastern.
Yeah.
So when you're over there, you're like, no, I'm going to be really staunch and proud Māori. And they go, hey, man, how do you say in your language, mad dog, puke on your face?
Yeah.
And then you try and come up with this loose translation of Māori and try and convince
tū tera mai ngā
e tō mātou matu i te rangi, and they go, mean. That's awesome. But, I understand the point is that you do, when you're away from home, it's like you become this staunch advocate.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's like but then also too, like even in all my years, like those initial years, in my early 20s especially, I would feel like this real staunch advocate for Māori, but I would feel safer doing it in America. And then I would come home and I would feel really fucking mad about it. And I would just kind of shut up. And I wouldn't, and
Even now?
Not now. No.
In your 20s.
Yeah, but I wouldn't feel, like and especially too, I think there was, whether it's a thing or not, like I personally felt, there was this also within our Māori community, I'd left. I wasn't contributing to our Māori, scene here. I wasn't involved in it. I was watching from afar enviously a lot of the time, wanting desperately to be involved, not knowing how to speak up, not knowing how to go, oh my God, I love your kaupapa, can I jump on that, or can I come and, support that, just being scared. And so it was this weird thing where I'd go overseas and be staunch as, and then I come home and just be, oh, kia ora. And so that's changed, thank goodness, but...
Okay, so when did that change, and how did that change?
I mean, a lot of it is just also age and growing up, and I think also too, I had such a interesting situation where, because I started working so early, my contemporaries are the people who were my age when I started, and so I had amazing people, and still do, around me, who really awhi'd me and never made me feel like I didn't belong or that I wasn't a part of. But I think with being young, it doesn't matter how much success you have, it doesn't matter what you achieve, there is still a trajectory in terms of maturity and in terms of coming into your own skin and being comfortable with who you are. And so even though I'd had all of the success and I had all these super successful mates and, and they welcomed me in, I still had all this, I remember even silly things they'd all get up and do karaoke and I'd be too shy to get up and sing. It was just oh gosh, it's just all that silly stuff that you feel when you're uncomfortable, And so I think, as I started to grow up a little bit, even though I'd had all these really big life experiences and I, had been exposed to a lot of situations that required a lot of maturity, I still had to do the work and get through that stuff to actually really, for it all to line up and to be able to function the way that I like dreamed of myself functioning.
Wow.
Yeah.
What is your karaoke song, by the way? What's your go-to?
Oh, you know what? I'm still really shy when it comes to karaoke.
Why?
I don't know. I think, you know what? It's like, it's like all Māori can sing, and then I'm like, then I feel I'm like one of those Māori who goes, but I can't. But then I'm like, we all say that. But really, we all can't help ourselves. You know?
Yeah. Well, the only reason I ask is because I'm not shy about it, but I probably should be, judging from the responses I've got from some people. I mean, I just think that someone who is as multi-talented as you are, as supremely talented as you are, still has nervousness about public displays of expression.
Oh, absolutely. and I think too, like that was, and even just outside of, I'd also come up in an interesting way where I had a lot of imposter syndrome around being an actor because I hadn't traditionally, I hadn't gone to Toi Whakaari, I hadn't trained, I hadn't, and so I remember doing a play when I was 19 or 20, with some of, the best actors we have. And, and I was crippled with anxiety around, there were 15 of us in the cast, and in rehearsals, every day someone was doing a warm-up, activity, and a warm-up exercise. I just like come into acting and like, on my own, like just using my like raw dog trauma and not actually like understanding the craft of it.
Yeah.
And so I was just like, I don't know any warm-up exercises. I don't know what these people are doing. Like, I'm looking around these rehearsals and they're like doing all this stuff with their mouths and their hands and they're playing all these games and they know all these tongue twisters. And I was just like, oh, what do I do? And I was just, every day, like I knew it was coming up my turn for this, I had to pick the warm-up exercise. And I must have been like shriveling as a person. And I had one bro in the cast, thank goodness. And he must have picked up on it and he just said, sis, just play Duck, Duck, Goose. And I was like, okay. And so I was like, got to my turn, I was like, we're going to be playing Duck, Duck, Goose for a warm-up exercise. I'm an actor. I know how to do this. So I had like a lot of, I was like, really scared of that kind of stuff because I think too, there was also like an interesting separation that happened where people would be so respectful, but like they would revere like my success. And so I didn't feel like I had many people that I could really connect with. And I would always just be like, I just want to be, like you guys and just all hang out and, but I was...
Oh, you mean they wouldn't...
like people would just be like...
Just
go
to dinner or something.
Yeah, like you go to dinner,
wow.
like, but people would just be like, oh, but, Keisha's Keisha and she's working and she's like, the man doing her thing. And the whole time I'd just be like, I just want to be friends with everybody. And so, and I think... But I think too, like I found it's so important. Like once I also started talking about that stuff and saying out loud, like I get really nervous. Or, I'm really outgoing, I'm really extroverted, but like I can feel like painfully shy in worlds that people might think I'm really comfortable in. People would go, oh my God, me too. And it's like, it's just amazing once you start talking about those things openly, right?
The thing that amazes me is that you're not the only one that said that. Who, someone who is a very high profile, who is supremely talented, who is an actor, Academy Award nominated, all that kind of thing, but is cripplingly shy, which surprises a lot of people when they hear that. I mean, even now, we're talking. I don't get a sense of that at all.
Yeah, it is. It's like, and I think too, because I think there's like, and also too, it's, I've learned the life of an actor is like so fascinating because I think people really only see such a small part of it, and there's the really, the glamorous and the, you're going to hear a makeup done and you're on a red carpet and, but it's still mahi, and it requires real discipline. And there's a lot of it that's pretty boring, and there's a lot of it, where, I will be on the road for a really long time on my own, away from my family and living in hotel rooms or living in places that aren't my home. And you have to be, super disciplined because you've got to wake up early every morning. It's not. And I think so it's like other actors, I think, who understand that trajectory of it. You know, everyone, we all know, we all go, you know, there's a lot of it. And in that, there's a lot of time on your own. And it can be a very, like, quiet job in that way. But you know, it's such a, from the outside, you know, you only get to see the fun bits. And those parts are fun too. They're just different, you know. And so I do understand how there are a lot of performers who are shy or who are anxious or who get nervous.
Do you mind if I ask you about something about process? I'm going to try and remember the words. This speech is a token of love and respect for Koro Apirana, my grandfather. My name is Paikea Apirana. Pause. A few tears. You go, bub, I think happens. And I'm a descendant from a long line of chiefs that stretches all the way back to Hawaii. I hope I've got it right.
Yes,
anyway,
yeah.
The process that goes into something like that, which is one of the most, I think, poignant and beautiful performances I've seen, and I suspect many people will agree with me on that. I mean, how do you do that? Because I don't know. I couldn't do that.
It's so interesting to, you know, go back to that performance.
Is it hard to talk about that given it's so long ago?
No, not at all, because I think it is so, but, you know, it really, you know, as a child you have access to parts of yourself that you don't know you need to hide or that you're not, you know, and I think that was a huge part of that, you know, and Nikki Caro was an incredible director who allows space and time and rehearsal and really respects actors and loves actors. And so I was given a perfect platform and to be able to build a performance like that without even really knowing what I was doing. You know, now it's different. You know, now it's, you know, like as we get older, I think, you know, we get more conscious and we get more aware of, you know, hiding parts of ourselves and, oh, that's yucky, I don't want to go into that and I don't want to look at that part of me and I'll just try to cry thinking about my dead cat versus, you know, the real stuff that hurts me. And so I think it was just such a raw, like, version of me as a child and being in safe hands with people who, like, safely were able to see, I think, that. But then I do believe that it's like you kind of, as we get older and, like, whether it applies to, you know, my acting or just in life, we just spend, like, a lot of time, I think, trying to get back to those parts of ourselves, do you know, and the openness that children have.
You still try to do that
now?
now?
Totally, yeah. Yeah, definitely. And I think I try to do that, like, in all parts of my life, you know, just to be less judgmental and to be less closed and to be more open.
But you have to be willing to allow the vulnerability to come out. Now
exactly.
That's tough.
Oh, very tough. And I think, but I do think that I've had something that maybe a lot of actors haven't had, where you've, like, shown vulnerability at its, like, highest space, you know, as like a small child, that it allowed me to remain quite vulnerable throughout my life. And even in the space of a film set, now, if I had started with the knowledge I have now as an adult and the understanding I have of my job and the hierarchy that exists, you know, I wouldn't have the guts. You know, as a kid, I was precocious and probably annoying, but I just asked lots and lots of questions. What does that do? What does that light do? Why did you push that button on that camera? Yeah. Why did you take the film out? Yes, I did start acting when there was still film. You know, where are you going to put it? How are you going to cut it up? Yeah. You know, now, as a grown woman who's, you know, a professional, I might be too scared to ask those things because, I understand, that person's doing their job, Keisha, shut up, he's busy, he doesn't want to hear, he doesn't want to answer these questions. And so even though it wasn't a traditional education, you know, I didn't have to go to drama school, film school, I had such an incredible education in terms of the film industry because of that vulnerability, because of my ability to not be scared and not know the rules and go. And I just wanted to know everything. I was curious. So it was, I think I'm really grateful for that, because I think too, in that it's allowed me to remain somewhat vulnerable throughout in my job, but also I have such a deep respect for the process of storytelling and filmmaking, because I've been able to see it and ask questions about it like that.
But it takes... Yeah, okay. I mean, I get the point. I mean, one of the things that strikes me, though, is that it requires incredible innate talent, doesn't it?
Probably,
to be able to do it when you haven't been trained.
Yes. And, and that to that point, it took me a really long time to accept that, that this is a gift, and that what I do and what, is a gift. And also too, because I had so much fear around, like, where do you go? Like, it's like, I'd never done anything in my life. I made a movie and then was nominated for the highest accolade that people spend their whole lives working toward. Like, where to from here? And, and as a child, it's really hard to comprehend that anything that isn't meeting that isn't a failure. And so I felt like if I wasn't continually winning every single award or like reaching those kinds of levels of performance, then I wasn't good, and I would equate that to, well, maybe I wasn't, I was just good in that, or I wasn't meant to do that. And now I understand, that it's a gift and that it is a talent, and it requires, a lot of hard work and dedication, but it helps when it's what you're meant to be doing as well. Mm-hmm. It's, it really does. And I do, and I love to like encourage people to like find what it is. Everyone, we all have, it doesn't have to be, acting in big movies. We all have a gift, we all have something to give, we all have something to offer. And it's like, when you find those spaces in yourself, they feel true, and they feel, to who you are. And now I feel that, now I'm very much, I'm an actor. It took me a really long time to be able to say that out loud.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think the other thing is that, how some of us know that you're really good at it is because you've been on Star Wars.
Exactly.
Which, for some of us who grew up at a time when, or were born actually when Star Wars first came out, which makes us incredibly old actually, when I think about it. But everything else that you've done, and do you think, by the way, a body of work, like, do you think, okay, I haven't done enough of that, I need to do those kind of roles, or do you just, because you're so good at it, you can do anything, I suppose. But, are you literally one of these people who go, right, I need to do that, I need to do something like that now? Okay,
I think I used to, like, I've definitely chilled out a bit.
Oh, yeah, okay.
I used to be much more, I need to do more of this thing in order to, like, prove that I'm good at, I should do more movies or more, want to be in a franchise or whatever. Now it's so fast. I mean, I guess it's like 21 years since I did Whale Rider. And so that in itself, like, to successfully have a career, I've been fortunate enough that I've never done anything else. I mean, I've done lots of other things, but in terms of to feed myself, to look after my family, to make money, I've never done anything else, and that is hugely successful. Yeah, and so, and it's an interesting job. It's so you're really only ever kind of as good as the last thing you do, and it's all, everyone kind of starts again every time. And
so that maxim is true, is that you literally think, done that, it's got to be good, and if I'm not good at it, then I might not get to mine.
Might not get the next job, and it's like, and it is really an industry where nothing's guaranteed.
And how much tougher, or maybe actually it's easier, more of an asset, but, eldest is 16 now,
Mm-hmm.
and a 3-year-old.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean, that makes it interesting,
Yeah.
particularly when you're lonely, and probably during COVID too, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, you would have had baby 2021.
Yeah, during COVID. Yeah.
Holy heck.
Yeah, definitely. And it's...
Can't come home.
No, couldn't come home. Was really tough. But it is like... It's even fascinating now, like, having a teenager, to think, like, of, you know, like, where I was at that point in my life. Because, like, you know, I've done what I think, you know, a lot of parents we do. We want to give our children the version of the childhood that we didn't have, and then they don't want it. So, so it's like, you know, like, it's like I've got an amazingly beautiful teenage daughter who, you know, I was like, I was like working full time at your age. What's up? You know, can you give me a hand, please? And so, but it's, you know, it really excites me. Like, my children excite me in terms of having a parent that, like, to see a parent that is doing what they love. I think that is, like, such an important part. I think, you know, I think as mama and as women, there is so much expectation in the world that, you know, that you can do it all, but, like, also don't talk about it and don't tell anyone and don't complain and you know, and I staunchly feel, you know, it's like beyond being a feminist, I staunchly see in my day-to-day life with my colleagues, like my male colleagues, are never asked where their kids are. They're never asked, you know, how do they balance parenthood and children? You know, I'm like, it's like a normal question to ask a woman. Yeah. You know, and it's really important to me, especially having daughters, that they see the superpower of women, the superpower of wahine. I think that women innately have an incredible ability to balance lots of things at once and to remain empathetic but still very much be in charge. And it's so, like, exciting to me that, like, really is, like, what drives me these days. Like, I love that. I love that my kids get to see that. I love that they get to grow up with a mum who, you know, it's like, that is human. Like, I'm, you know, do the best I can. Like, I'm not perfect, that's for sure, you know, like, I'm, you know, but at the same time, they see someone who is living in their truth and really going for, you know, like, my integrity is really important. Well, you know, my career is really important, and I want that for them in whatever capacity that is. Right now, you know, but the baby, maybe she will, but my teenager wants nothing to do with the film industry. I'm like, if I were you, I would be banking on this nepotism. I'm like, I did not work this hard for my daughter not to somehow benefit off what I have done. But so I'm like hoping she comes around. You know?
No, look, I know what you're saying because I've got an 18-year-old who I actually don't think likes her father, the way in which she acts. But anyway, let alone has any interest in what her father's doing in his profession. Where are you nowadays? Are you at home or are you in America? I heard New York.
Yeah, I live in New York. Which is awesome. Really cool. Never, ever, ever, a little girl growing up on Line Road in GI, never thought that I'd be, like, living in New York City. In recent years, it's, you know, when I first left Aotearoa, I left with this idea that I probably wouldn't come back, and that if I did come back, it would be, like, on my own terms, and it would be very quietly, and it, you know, would be some version of coming back and not
understand that given
here.
the reasons and everything that was going on when you left.
This really, and so in the last few years, something interesting kind of shifted where I had another pepe that changed a lot, and I all of a sudden went, oh, I really feel like I need to move home. I really feel like I, you know, was like, tupuna were like annoying me, and like I was just like lots of dreams about being home, and like why do I, like, you know, I'd feel flat, I'd miss home, I'd go like take a swim in the moana, and I'd still be like, my husband is a surfer, and you know, and I'd be like, oh, but it's not mine, you know, as you know, like my cup just wasn't getting filled, and I just felt really strongly, and I'd never really felt that before, and I also felt really strongly like I wanted to, like, come home and work here and tell our stories and be, you know, a part of and involved in all these spaces that I'd kind of scaredy cat looked in from the outside before. So it's been a really interesting time, but we're definitely slowly working on coming home full time.
What does that telling our stories part look like?
I think it's really, we've got such an interesting industry in New Zealand, and it's definitely
interesting's a good word
yeah,
for
no,
it.
it's shifted. It's small. We all know that, right? And it's shifted, but I do think that sometimes it's like this idea of like integration versus collaboration. And I think that there has been a big push for this like conscious idea of like integrating Māori stories into Paikea systems, and we just have to, and it's become this like box tick, and then it's like, and if you're Māori and then we have many who are like trailblazing, then like you go do your own thing over there, and cool, we'll whatever, but we'll just keep doing what we do over here. And I do really feel like there is like so much more space for a more collaborative industry that utilizes the systems that we do have and honors the way that other people work, and that allows people to tell stories in their way, and for their voices to be heard. And it doesn't have to exist in you go over, you can do that, but do it over there, you know. And it's like, well, we have, and it's like, and then also too, on both sides of the fence, we Māori can be a little guilty of going, I don't want to make my stuff over there anyway, because that institution is, well, you know what? Sometimes I believe it can be a little remiss to like not use the resources that exist either. And so what does that look like? It's a big concept, and I don't know if I'm the person to figure it out. But it is something that I see, and I do feel like as someone who has been fortunate and does have some element of privilege to have access to both spaces, I see the opportunity.
You're right, it's a massive question. And you're right, you probably have some unique capabilities that can, I don't know, bust some things down. I mean, look at what Chelsea and them are doing in distribution alone, right? And that is something that they felt was a requirement simply because they weren't being able to get the access through other distribution platforms to be able to do what they needed to do. So there's probably different points that you could have really profound impact on, and I am curious to see where that leads. But you're right. I mean, it is, and there's some fears, for example, with writer's strike at the moment. Even before that, lots of the big productions were going to Australia; they weren't coming here. And even though New Zealand had the attraction of, scenery and people and the way in which we work and all that kind of thing, it still felt like the production sector was moving away from us, not here. Yes. And we were missing out on opportunities.
Absolutely. And I think too, like a lot of it, I think also comes in, and this is collectively, this is Māori, Paikea, Pacifica, like collectively trusting our own voices and trusting that we have stories to tell, and trusting that we're capable of telling them.
Is there a story that you want to tell now?
Many, but I think, there's many stories. I think, I would like to tell, I think there's like a really cool thing happening with like a younger generation at the moment that has like moved away from a more stereotypical version of like what a story is. And I think a lot of that has existed for a long time because things have felt like a little tokenistic, and that idea of, it's like putting, a brown person in a show and then it's being like, see, we did it. And it's like, no, that's not it. It's about that all of these stories that we've seen already on television and film here in Aotearoa, they exist from all different perspectives. That there is not a version of a Pacifica lens, there is not a Māori lens, there is not a Paikea lens. Like that these experiences exist for all, and that every time you see a Māori family on TV, they do not have to sit down and do a karakia before they eat. Do you know? And it's like, if they do, and it's appropriate to do, great. But like, there's also versions of the West family from Outrageous Fortune who are brown. And kind of, and that's, I don't know, like if that is that coherent, but it's what I'd like to see more of, like I'd like to, and that's what I mean, like in terms of just voices true to people's experiences versus what we think the experience is based on where they're from.
Wow.
Yeah.
That sounds awesome. I mean, is this something that's going to happen pretty quickly, do you think? I know
yeah.
writer strike and stuff is having a massive impact, and I don't know when you have to get back to America, because what series are you in, by the way, of FBI? Is it 5?
We're in 5, yeah. So
you have to go back there eventually at some stage,
eventually,
right?
yeah. I think, I'm like working on a show at the moment which is exciting, that I created, which is about, a family in Glen Innes. I don't know where I would get that, inspiration from. Because those stories, are important to me.
Yeah.
And I think too, it's funny because
you're doing that now?
Yes, yeah. And there is like an old adage of, people always say like writers, that the big thing is like write what you know. And I think, and also too like that, like, so that also like trickles down into, there is a lot of, like we make a lot of like heavy cinema in Aotearoa and like deal with like a lot of really heavy themes and dark stuff.
What you mean.
And particularly through a brown lens, and I had a pretty heavy childhood, but like I remember it in a really light way, because light is what gets you through that. And actually, like when people are going through like really heavy shit, like no one's talking about it. No one's, we've got to sit down, have a cup of tea and have a talk about how we're all really living, got a shitty life. It's like, my life was really, my memories of my childhood are really like bright and bubbly and like, and supportive, and like the community that we had. And so I'm really excited to maybe try and flip that stuff a little bit and do, and I think, we have people who, are doing it in really beautiful ways already. But it would be nice if that just becomes more accessible and more
I think
the norm and not these one-off.
I think it's a good point, that balance between light and shade.
Yeah.
And, as you know, we are full of mirth and laughter and warmth and empathy. And maybe it's just because it's harder to do. I don't know. It just seems to be that, particularly when we talk about our development as a people and our social interaction and colonisation and all that kind of stuff, is that because of the profound impacts of colonisation, is that that's a story that we like to talk about a lot, because maybe we need to constantly remind ourselves of that. Yep. And, Tibino Regan says is that we need to remember. But you're right. I think the balancing bit around, warmth and beauty and laughter and, as I say, mirth is something that people, I think, would be really encouraging of. And, if there's ever a requirement in the film for, a podcast interviewer to make a...
I'll keep you in mind.
Or someone who thinks they can sing karaoke but can't, then you know who to call. But I just think that, you're right, that, not just GI, but just places in Auckland. And yes, we tell a lot of Auckland stories. But do we see those internationally? No.
And that's to that point. That is like another big thing that I think, there's places like Ireland and places like in Scandinavia throughout. They do like such a wonderful job of making content that feels so true to them, and yet they're all stories that we relate to. They're all things that we watch and eat up and go, and like, it's a different dialect, it's a different language, the people look different, but they're stories that we understand. And that, I think there's still some kind of version in New Zealand of making stuff still for the outside versus making it, we're not, I still don't see that, like we can really just be like so hoha with each other and not supportive of our own. And that is across the board, and particularly in the arts. It's like, why aren't our local musicians' gigs like packed to, unless you're 660, but, just like packed out, and it's just, but yet, we have a whole culture here where like everyone like deeply like, loves East Coast rap, and so it's just being, and I think there's still this, we still make things sometimes like for how other people will perceive us.
It's a really debilitating thing, the way in which we do that to ourselves,
Yeah.
right? I don't get it.
No, me neither. And the other thing is too, like after years and years of like feeling a little shut out by Aotearoa in like lots of different ways, I still am so proud that I'm from here. I think that we have such an abundance of talent. I think that we are so fortunate, and I love being overseas, and I love flying our flag, and I love being like, yeah, man. And, and now it is kind of interesting because there is like, in my industry, it's become a lot more accessible internationally. And there is like, Kiwis pop up on every set. It's like every job I'm doing, oh, there's one, like, kia ora, bro, like we're everywhere, and it's like, there's a demand for that. There's a demand for something that we have internationally, and we're not recognizing it ourselves. We're still going, oh, well, that person left, and it's like, guys,
Yeah.
it's like, and it's just, I don't know what the like greater healer of that is.
Yeah.
But, there's this, we still do it. It's like this tall poppy thing. It's a chip on our shoulders. It's,
Yep. A country that's actually the opposite and really good at being the opposite of that is Australia.
Very.
And
they're so good at it, to the point where I always say, like, Australians are like more American than Americans.
Yeah.
They're just...
Well, I've got an Aussie mate of mine who I talk to irregularly because he does my head in. But, I told him, and I'm talking to, a couple of people, and I mentioned your name. He goes, oh, she's an Aussie. And you know what? It really pissed me off.
Like, no.
It really pissed me off because I was going, no. And then, obviously born in Australia. And he goes, no. But the way that they look after their own and talk about their own is completely different.
And
right?
also, too, it's obviously it's a lot bigger, so there's like economical, questions about it. But at the same time, there is an environment that feels more exciting, I think, even just in my profession alone. Like, Aussie actors love going home and making stuff, like no matter how big they get, and that just doesn't feel like something that happens as much here. Like, it's just kind of the stepping stone at some point is getting out. Yeah. And then once you're out, like there's not really the option to come back, and it's like, well, how do we shift that? Like, how do we be more excited about, what we do and own our stuff more?
You know what? I never thought we'd get into an Aussie conversation. But it happens, and it kind of organically appears and all that kind of stuff. Fascinating topic because, it still happens in Aotearoa now, You don't live at home, so therefore you don't get to have a say on.
Yeah, no, exactly. You don't, you haven't been here, you don't know.
I'll go back to Auckland as well. I hear a lot. E hoki ki tamaki. It is a thing, eh? Very
much, and I think it can be, I think for all of us, right? It can be exhausting, right? It's an exhausting part of our culture here. Yeah. It's just like, oh my gosh, like we can be just haters. Yeah. We're just, and we've really got a lot to celebrate, and we just sometimes can't push ourselves. I think I can be guilty of it. We can all be guilty of it. I used to. For years, I was just such a hater about New Zealand. I was just like, it's my home, but whatever,
and you kept that pretty quiet, though.
No, but it's so funny because when you're overseas and you say you're from here, like people are just, oh my God,
Yeah, they gush.
Why would you live here? It's a bucket list destination for the majority of people in the world. Yeah. And it's just. It was really interesting. My tāne, he's from New York, and it was such a healing part of my life. I remember when I brought him home to Aotearoa, and just to be able to see, particularly Auckland, because it's like the city I ride and die for, but also get me out. But and so it's just to see through the lens of someone that I really respect and love. This place that I have got so much, it's just and so much trauma, and and just I was like, oh, it was really nice to watch it through his eyes and just go, wow, like, that's cool that you see it that way, and maybe, it is that, and maybe it is this big, beautiful, you know.
You know, you're right, because I would have thought I had a mate from America come over, and I would have thought he'd look at the Harbour Bridge and go, that ain't a bridge.
Exactly, yeah.
You know, Sky Tower, that ain't a tower.
Yeah.
You know, all that kind of thing. But no, they see everything we tend to not think about.
Absolutely.
What a beautiful harbour. Taking out the Takaprai. Oh my gosh, how much, you know, all that.
Yeah.
Anyway. Yeah. Wow, so much more to talk about. I wish we had more time. We do have more time. Anyway, we could keep going. The other thing, and I mentioned this off camera, but I'll mention it on camera, is I've got this photo of you, me, and a fella called Peelback. His proper name's Te Whetu McCorkindale, but no one in the industry will know that. His name is, for all intents and purposes, Peelback. And for years I've tried to figure out a way of cutting him out. Because if I could, it'd be worth millions. But the reason why I raise that is because, you know, I just want you to know, and this will sound really kind of patronising and doderish, and maybe even potentially stalker uncle-ish. So don't take it in that way. But you know, we're very proud of what you've done.
Oh, thank you.
And continue to do. And I just wish you the best for it, you know?
Thank you.
Just keep going.
Yeah.
And come home and then help us change the world, you know?
Hopefully. I mean, you know, I feel really excited about coming home. And I feel really excited about maybe what I can offer in terms of shifting things, you know, and even, you know, I think a really big thing that I've discovered throughout the course of my career, and particularly in terms of like my relation to here, is like I said, like there's still such a lot of times, like particularly for Māori who grow up, you know, as with like systemic results of like our colonization. And it's still, the big thing for me is accessibility. It's accessibility to spaces and to education and to even seeing people around you that are doing things, you know, and that is such a huge, huge important part of allowing people to believe, children to believe that there are options for them. And, you know, and I see that even in my industry, you know, there's lots of people who are still, you know, like, you know, doing the work, but they still didn't come from the spaces I came from. And that was something I was really scared of for a really long time, and it was something I wanted to hide, and it was something that didn't feel very pretty. And now I really, really strongly believe like that is my superpower. Like my superpower is that I've been there, I know what that is, I know how that feels, I know how that feels to not have options, and I hope that I can be someone in our communities to facilitate just a space for those people to be able to see that there are different options, you know, for all of us.
Well, when you're ready to come home, there's houses available in Mount Albert, or as we call it, Monal Bear.
Monal Bear.
You know, it's no GI, but it's you know, just in case you're looking for that. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you
For joining us. Thank you for giving us your time.
Thank you so much.
And thank you for joining Indigenous 100. Ngā mihi nui kia koe.
Ngā mihi.